Hey, Mark Clark here, the author of The Problem of God. We're exploring the 10 major questions that skeptics have toward Christianity. And that was me growing up. I didn't walk into a church till I was 19. And one of the major problems I actually had was the church itself, the problem of hypocrisy, which we're talking about today. The fact that the church says they believe something, but they don't actually live it out. They say they want to be godly and holy, but they just act like the rest of the world. So why would I want to really believe in this? And there's a few things to really respond in regard to this. The first one is when we look into the church and we see people who are hypocritical, the first thing that we got to understand is we shouldn't expect anything different. Partly for two reasons. The first one is the church is full of people who aren't actually Christians. So I run a church. I have about 5,000 people in our church across many sites in the west coast of Canada, in Vancouver and Calgary. And when I look out at the people, you know, there's lots of people who look and say, well, look at that person. They come to your church and they don't act right. Their life's a disaster, and I saw them smoking out in front of the church, and they parked their car up on my, the wheels up on my lawn, and I came out and they gave me the middle finger and said, hey, I'm going to ignore you, I'm going to church. So what is that? What kind of Christians are these? And the reality is the church should be full of people like that, because it's people who recognize the poverty of their own spirit that actually need to come to church and hear about God and hear about Jesus and how to be transformed. If your church doesn't have people like that, I'm not sure you're reaching people who don't know Jesus yet. And so we're all broken, and we should expect that the church is full of people who don't actually know Jesus. Secondly, the church is full of people who say they know Jesus, but they actually don't. And that shouldn't surprise us, because Jesus actually said in Matthew chapter 7, there's going to be a whole bunch of people who said they believe in me, that are doing miracles in my name, but in the end, when they die and they come to the judgment seat, they don't actually, Jesus is like, I don't even know you, away from me. That they said something externally, but they didn't actually believe it in their heart. And so there's not only false teachers out there, there's actually false disciples. And so when you look into the church, you have to recognize there's a whole bunch of people who say they believe, but they don't. And the reality is this: at the end of the day, of course, you can look through church history and see that Christians have done bad things, and it's because they've misunderstood the teachings of Jesus. Any kind of historical moment where the church is killing people or burning witches or whatever your reasons are, even though those stats have been gravely exaggerated. If you read Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, for instance, he says that the church maybe killed 5 million witches. Well, that would be like a large percentage of the entire population of the world at the point that he's talking about. Whereas the history actually tells us there was closer to maybe 20 or 30 in particular areas. But the point is that even if they're not exaggerated, those actions are done because the church misunderstood the teachings of Jesus, whose constant ethic was to turn the other cheek and to love your enemy, not kill them. So sometimes when we look back and we see these wars that were done in Jesus' name, they weren't actually done in the name of Christianity. They were geopolitical wars that people used Christianity, and then they went out and had their nation-state wars. No one actually who's read the Gospels would say that's what Jesus wants us to do. So we've got to understand something. There's a difference between the church and how they've maybe messed things up and continue to, and Jesus. And what I would challenge you to is to wipe all the actions of people, Christians themselves, off the table, because they're going to mess this up. And then put on the table the person and the work of Jesus. Because at the end of the day, as C.S. Lewis said, when you get to in front of God, he's not going to ask you what your neighbor did. He's not going to ask you what you read in books. He's going to ask you, what did you actually do with your life? And as one writer has said, if I'm walking along a path and you ask me the way home, and I point it out to you, but I'm walking along the path drunkenly and I'm falling side to side, it doesn't mean that path isn't the way home. It just means I'm walking along it drunkenly. I'm messing up. And our call in life is to actually look to Jesus, not the people who try to follow him, and judge his ideas and the truth based on him. If you found out that Einstein was a kleptomaniac, would it mean that his science was actually wrong? Or would it mean that you're judging the wrong things? Sometimes when we look at Christianity, we have what scholars call trivial objections, things that we're evaluating that have nothing to actually do with the question on hand. And that, I would say, is the issue that people have with the problem of hypocrisy. Don't judge it on the people, judge it on the person of Jesus.